Welcome to SiGMA TV and a huge welcome to Jason Shiers, who's joining us today. Certified transformation coach, certified psychotherapist at Infinite Recovery Program. Jason has been working with addictions and mental health for over 20 years. Jason, thank you so much for joining us here at SiGMA. How are you today? How are things going?
I'm really good. Excited to be here. Looking forward to this conversation and seeing where we go. Seeing
Brilliant.
what I've
Well,
got to say.
well, fantastic. And as I said, I'm really excited as well, because we're going to be addressing the responsible side of gaming. Now, from what I understand, you are extremely passionate about this subject, and that there is somewhat a personal story of yours. Can you share that with us so we can kind of set the scene for what we'll be talking about today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, it's a long story, but I'll give it to you in a short version. As short as possible. But I grew up with addictions. Ever since my very early teenagers. Started off with a lot of gambling and gaming. Back then, it wasn't on the phone. It was you literally had to go to venues, bookmakers, arcade machines, slots, things like that. And my addiction was quite how would you call it? Well, there was a lot of crime involved in getting money to gamble, to take drugs, alcohol, all those things for many years. I mean, I had 10 years of my life was taken up in that whole process, and it was extreme. It was kind of like I was quite lost in it, for a long time. So, like, to the point of being homeless and living in a shelter, and like my whole family disowned me, and there was really not much left at the end of it. So yeah, it was intense, and it felt never ending, I guess, at the time.
Listen, Jason, thank you so much for your honesty. I mean, I feel very moved by hearing you say this. I assume it is something that you were able to overcome. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit later on. But first of all, before we go any further, what is an addiction? And how do you know when a pastime or passion has got out of control? Because I assume from the beginning, you're talking about alcohol. We all like a drink. Most people like a drink. You're talking about gaming, and there's a lot of people who just enjoy gaming or gambling, and it's not an issue for them. So how do you know when something's gone from being just a pastime and something you enjoy to something that is controlling you?
I think the first place many people go is they start to question, is this normal? It's kind of like, it's very common for people just to start to go, is this normal? And it's like when you're asking yourself that question, it's already not. There's already something happening because we all have a sense of what's right and what's not right, but most of us have been conditioned out of that, conditioned away from our intuition. So we've become disconnected from trusting our own inner guidance. And when there's part of us that's saying, is this right? Is this normal? Does everyone else do this like I do it? It's kind of like when it's already there. I mean, that's your intuition, like pointing you to the fact that something's not right. But many people have become so disconnected from that they just stay in that question, and things get progressively worse, and until the point when they have to wake up one day. Okay, it's kind of like, there's a pile of mail on the door, for bills that I haven't paid, or there's debt collectors coming, or I've not got the money to pay the mortgage this month because I've spent it, whether we're talking about gambling or alcohol or drugs, whether people are, I mean, drugs have got a little bit different external manifestation in that, like, people will commit crime like I did, like to get drugs, and it becomes extreme because the habit is unaffordable, and if you don't have the money to fund it, obviously. And in that case, it's like, seems more obvious that something's not right, when you're committing crime. It's kind of like, I knew what I was doing. I knew the life I was living when I was doing that. But for many people, if we're just talking about gaming, gambling and stuff, they've kind of they may have like what you might call on the outside a normal life. They have a family and a career and a business even, or something like that. So they're the ones kind of like spending the money and asking themselves the question, like, just from that, they haven't got that external manifestation that makes it really obvious that there's something really wrong because they can afford it. So, I mean, it's not just people who can't afford it, but there's there's a varying scale, from people with money to people who are completely, had nothing, and will commit crime to get money,
But it's also, I mean, there is also a middle ground, isn't there, where you go from just enjoying an activity, a drink or a gambling or whatever as a pastime. Before you talked about going to an extreme of crime, there's a middle ground, isn't there, where you kind of justify things to yourself, where you're saying to yourself, no, it's fine, it's okay, it's I can afford it this month. I can afford to have an extra flutter on the horses or playing on esports. I can afford it because there's a disposable income. Whereas somebody else might say, well, there's a disposable income, but you could be spending it much more responsibly. So is there a transition period from going from something that is, just a pastime, into what you're talking about, which originally you're talking about, which is quite extreme? Is there a period of time that you can just self-check and just say, okay, is this getting out of control?
Well, yeah, I mean, like what I was talking about, like about where people start questioning, is this normal, often comes at the same time as a justification. It's kind of like, it'll be okay, or it's not that important. But the main point of this conversation for me is that addiction is not a real thing that develops, in traditional psychology, it's kind of like addiction is a real thing. It's like a disease, or it's but from my point of view, the way I look at that is that is just a concept. People are not born, that way. They're not born with an addiction. Usually they've got something else going on in their life, that the reason that it becomes more appealing to whatever they're doing, whether it's taking drugs, gambling, doing all those things, it's because that's an escape from that. So it's like the actual thrill or the excitement is more of a pull towards, more exciting than like sitting with their own thoughts and feelings about the life that they have. And that could be about relationships, weight loss, money troubles, status, career, job loss, anything, it's like any normal thing that people go through. But when people are kind of, certain people have a way of coping with that, and they just learn to cope in that way. It becomes a way of coping with feelings.
We're going to come back to that in a second, because you just mentioned a different way of thinking about addiction, and it is, most people would say, oh, I've got an addictive personality, or I don't have an addictive personality. And what you're saying is that actually there's another element to there. There's something else that applies there. Before we get there, I want to go back to something you said earlier about your own personal story. But generally speaking, what are the implications and effects of an addiction? What's the if you like, the usual story? What's going to happen?
Can you say a bit more about that question, just so I can be clear what you're asking?
Of course. So are we looking at, if you were looking to recognize traits within yourself, traits within somebody, maybe a family member or someone you care about, I'm looking at the implications, the effects of addiction. What are you looking for? What are you looking for as tangible? Is it an effect on the income? Is it low self-esteem? Is it these sorts of things that are common to every type of addiction?
Yeah, so like the signs and symptoms. I mean, it'll be different depending on what most people call the addiction as the problem. So gambling could be the problem, drugs could be the problem, but to me that's the symptom. That is the outward manifestation. That is the behavior that people are doing to fix their internal world. So it's kind of like, really, I'm taking drugs because of how I feel internally, and I want to make it better. And that's kind of what I'm in an endless pursuit of. The same way that I'm gambling, chasing a high to get money because I think it'll make me feel better. The same way that I'm addicted to stuffing food in my mouth, I can't stop, and it's kind of like, and I'm in a cycle of wanting to be thin but can't stop eating. That is the outward manifestation. It's not the actual problem. To me, that's what I call the symptom, and many people in psychology call it the problem. So to go back to your question, like to identify the symptoms, it's kind of like is what happens to people on the outside, and the way they behave and the way they become. Like it could be that they most of the time people will protect what they're doing, in an extreme, go to an extreme way, because they don't want anyone to take it away from them. And it makes sense, because when something has become your coping mechanism, you don't want anyone else to know about it, just in case they say, there's something not right about that, or they try and stop you, or they try and intervene, or they suggest you may want to change it, because at that time, probably most people are not ready to go, okay, I want to stop this. They're going through that process. And again, if there's physical stuff like drugs and alcohol, then external changes, physical changes, in the body, and just obvious stuff that you would notice and have a sense of something not being right, and people disappearing for days, not hearing from them, not keeping to commitments, not being able to show up for stuff, there's an endless list. And physical, again, like anxiety, withdrawal, like kind of spending a lot of time alone. There's an endless list of things, and it'll just all depend on each individual person and what it is they're doing, really.
Well, thank you. I mean, that's really great information and insight into, and we're talking about not just somebody who recognizes themselves as having an addiction, but somebody who cares about someone who may have an issue. And if we keep it within the sphere of gaming as well, of course, gaming, it can be great fun, it can be brilliant, and that's why we have gaming companies, because it can be exhilarating. But if somebody recognizes that has gone too far and that they have an addiction, how can this be treated? How is this usually treated first?
Yeah, in typical psychological treatments, it's quite difficult for gaming, because like your main, apart from various, what I might call in between stuff like therapy and the obvious stuff, it's kind of like reading books, maybe self-help groups, things that are available that you might search online. Your next stage is going to residential rehabilitation, which a lot of people don't want to do for gaming and gambling. Very few people want to do. And there's kind of like a, somewhat social, egotistical sort of boundary between, like, because people think, oh, I'm only gaming, I'm not an alcoholic. It's kind of like, so it seems like some addictions are somewhat socially superior to others. It's typical between alcohol and drugs that alcoholics think they're not like drug addicts. Drug addicts are really bad because they commit crime, but alcoholics are morally good people, because they only drink a legal substance, and it's kind of like, that's been very common throughout the years. And it's similar, with that gaming and gambling. And it makes sense, just from the person's mindset that they don't want to go into rehabilitation, it's kind of like, and that's, I guess, one of the difficulties, because that is addiction. The actual, what I call the symptom, the outward manifestation, is really irrelevant to the, the way it's treated.
So if that's, and so understanding what you're saying there about some addictions being more acceptable than others, a little bit more, an elegant addiction, or a much more socially acceptable a problem than, as you said, as opposed to drugs or anything like that. Having said that, the world is changing, and people's approaches are changing as well. So specifically, Jason, I want to ask you, if someone they've seen that they have an addiction to gaming, they appreciate that, they can see the effects that it's having on themselves and the people around them, but they don't want to go into rehabilitation. Like you said, it's one of the things that people don't want to do. How does your approach, how does your understanding differ to that traditional solution, or to traditional psychological therapies as well? How does your approach put that apart?
Yeah, my approach is what I call psycho-spiritual for my program, which is Infinite Recovery. And people don't have to go into rehabilitation. It is still a 28-day immersive program, but you can still be part of your own life. So you turn up for live groups, you have an immersive community, questions and answers, and an e-learning course to go through. So it's like you're really immersed in a process of understanding yourself, but just from a completely different perspective, not from a diseased perspective or from a broken perspective, but from the view that addiction makes complete sense. That if you're having a struggle in life, if you're creating your own misery with your own thoughts, then escaping from it is a natural response of the body. You know, it's kind of like, that is exactly how it works. It's almost like that the mind is a pressure cooker, and if you don't let off the steam, you know, with a steam valve, then, you know, what's the next stage? It's kind of like, if I'm constantly thinking scary thoughts, bad thoughts about the future, about the past, if I'm feeling guilt about the past, if I'm feeling fear about the future, if I'm worried, if I'm sad and lonely about my relationship breakdown, then I need some way to let it out. And many people have, addiction is just a normal way of coping, but people haven't. What's happened is psychology has turned it into a disease and come up with solutions for the problem. And so the difference with mine is that people are not broken, they're not damaged. You know, there's no lifetime concept to cope with or to make you okay, and you don't have to keep doing practices and, you know, constantly maintain something, you know, just to be okay. It just makes complete sense. And for me, like, it helps with the stigma, you know, like that, no, you're not broken. Actually, what you're doing makes sense. You know, it's kind of like, if I was also creating misery in my own mind, then I would want to escape from it too. And I realized that it's kind of like, if you take the example of if you cut your finger, right, and you leave it alone for a week, what happens? It heals, yeah. So the body and the mind is one. It's the same thing. The body and mind heals. It doesn't even make sense that the mind wouldn't heal itself if you didn't leave it alone. So it's like, in the same way that when you allow yourself to settle down, when you allow yourself to get a clear mind, you get to see clearly, you know, you get to feel better. But most people, psychology has just done a great job of creating all sorts of concepts about disease and mental health problems and struggles like depression, anxiety, and so on, that people think are facts, are true. And then the actual diagnosis, like addiction or depression or anxiety, becomes the reason for the problem.
What you're describing there, Jason, and I'm very moved by what you're saying, is that you're eliminating the shame out of
Yeah.
any mental health issue. You're just
Yeah.
saying that there's a cause that's made this happen. We'll deal with the cause, but it was a natural effect of what was going to happen because of the pressures that you're dealing with. Or it could be a circumstance or whatever, and just taking all of the shame out of it. And this, I believe, is why so many people don't reach out, because they do feel ashamed. They feel ashamed by what they're facing, or ashamed by the fact that they've developed an addiction, and don't want to ask for help because they don't want to go through the process of being told how bad they are.
Exactly. And there's one more step to add to that. I mean, that's a massive point, you know, that you just made. It is really about, because even in a lot of my articles, I wrote about who would want to come forward when in the UK, we're saying, and worldwide, that gambling addiction or gaming addiction is a mental health issue and it will be treated as such. So everyone has in their mind, oh my God, psychiatrist, medication, rehab, no chance. I'm just going to hide it. You know, I don't want to come forward. What I'm saying is, it's okay. It makes sense. You know, it's kind of like, and what I help people to see is how it makes sense. But there's one more thing to add to that. One more important point is that, and you said, it looks like it's because of circumstances, the pressure that they're experiencing, but actually no one is experiencing the outside world. Life is an inside out experience, that we're experiencing our perception of the outside world. We're not experiencing the outside world. And that's where everyone's suffering is created. And when people get to see that their suffering is created on the inside by them, not by their external circumstances. No matter, no job, no relationship, 100% of the time that experience is created from inside, because there's always perception. There's experience, perception, and then feeling, internal experience. So in my program, in Infinite Recovery, what we look at is that, and people start to realize how they can be free inside, regardless of what's happening on the outside, regardless of losing jobs, not being the way they want, not having the status they want, not having the amount of money in the bank that they want, having a relationship breakdown, losing someone, going through tragedy, whatever it is. You know, it's kind of like, regardless of what that is, that people can be free inside. And from that place, here's the key point. From that place, addiction no longer makes sense. They don't have to manage it. They just don't want to. They don't want to do something to make themselves feel better, because they already feel better. Joy and presence and awareness and fun and contentment is their natural state when they realize that it's not disastrous what's going on outside of them, that they have a different way of looking at that.
Jason, I wasn't expecting to be so moved by our conversation today, and thank you so much. I'd like to come back and talk to you about this some more. I don't think it's an issue that is going to go away anytime soon. It's been around for millennia. These issues that face people and the way that they see the world, and then the knock-on effect and the how that affects themselves and other people. So I'd like to come back and talk to you again about this, but thank you for the introduction and also for explaining this amazing difference in how to look at a challenge. We'll put your details on the screen right now so that anybody who wants to can get in touch with you. But for now, thank you very much indeed, Jason. We will be back to talk to you again. And thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you.
That's all from SiGMA TV. Thank you very much indeed. The details for Jason are on the screen. If you want to get in touch for yourself or anybody else, please do so. And we'll be talking to Jason once again.